Hi, good afternoon. My name is Anna. I head our data and platform teams at LegalZoom. And what I want to share with you today is what we have learned for the past year and a half building AI applications at LegalZoom. And in particular, I want to touch into 3 cost considerations that you have to think about as you are building these applications. I will start by saying that I don't want to refrain anyone from actually starting building with AI. I don't think those are deterrents. In fact, those are just opportunities or things that you have to think about as you are building these things. But before I go into that, let me talk a little bit about LegalZoom. LegalZoom has been around for 20 years. Our mission is to guard people's lives and legacies, and we do this by helping people navigate the complex legal system that we have, both on a personal front and the small businesses front. In this past 20 years, we have formed over 4.6 million businesses. We have helped over 4 million people building their estate plans, wills, and trusts. We have currently 1.8 million subscribers, some of which are in Charge B. Hopefully, all of them will be them soon. And those are subscriptions that help small businesses stay compliant with the several legal requirements that they have. We also have an independent attorney network of over 1,000 lawyers serving all of these 50 states. So we are in this legal space, as I was saying. And for this space in particular, has been a ton of excitement when GenAI came around. And that is because if you think about the legal space, a lot of the know-how, or 100% of our know-how, is text-based. We're talking about rules and regulations, forms, court documents. When you have a customer interaction, well, that's all speech-based. The legal staff has all of the knowledge in text. And what GenAI allows us to do is 2 things that are very interesting. So for companies, we have an opportunity to interact with that information a lot easily, much more easily than we used to have. So GenAI makes it easy to extract, to summarize, and to generate text-based content. So we basically learn faster to build better product solutions. On the customer side, there are a lot of opportunities that we have yet to tap into, but we can basically use LLM to provide hyper-personalized solutions for customers. And as you know, in the legal space, everything is hyper-personalized. Every case is a case. So this is all very exciting, and we have been building for the past year and a half several different applications throughout our existing products that you leverage this technology. We have an extensive knowledge base on our website. We call it the Article Center. Over this past 20 years, we wrote a lot about rules and regulations. And this is something that has a considerable traffic of people just trying to understand how the legal system works. We built an AI search summary feature that parses all of that content based on the question of the customer to actually answer the question more objectively. We also have a product called Doc Assist. What Doc Assist allows you to do is to upload a contract, and we can evaluate that contract and highlight some clauses that maybe you want to think about further, or you want to get an attorney to take a look at it. If you're doing business filings in the United States, most likely you will need to know your NAICS code. That's a classification of industry, and if you are a first-time business owner, it can be hard to figure out exactly what is your NAICS code. So we built this feature that allows you to describe what do you do as a business, and we'll find the NAICS code for you, and we use GenAI to do that. Finally, we recently launched an estate plan assistant. So for customers that have a personal space, if they have questions about estate planning, wills, and trusts, they now can ask this assistant to get a first initial overview of what they can do. But what are actually the costs of building these applications? We talked a lot about monetization, and the other side of that is cost. So I want to break down 3 key groups of costs that we are thinking about. And the first one is the most obvious one, and I'm calling this the cost of tokens. The tokens are basically the units that the private models use to price the usage of these models. So you can think about them as units of inputs and units of outputs to a model, and that's how these private models are priced. And when first GenAI came around, there was a lot of conversation around cost and how expensive those applications were. I ran this yesterday, so this is, I am asking these foundational models, where do I file a business formation in the state of California? And those are all costs in US dollar cents, and you can see that different models have different costs. You will also notice that I have Llama 2 there. That is an open source model, but even an open source model has costs. It's not free to run these things. You have to host it somewhere. And, but I will say that token costs themselves are dropping at a rate of 10x per year. And I personally believe that we have all reasons to think that they will continue to drop as these private companies start as they start making these models more available to us. They wanted to make it cheaper, so this cost will continue to decrease. Now, the application complexity will also increase, so net, you could see a slight increase of cost. But I guess what I want to say is that I do believe that, in a way, the industry is going to take care of that problem for us. Can you not think about token cost? Absolutely not. If you're successful in your application, most likely this can get expensive. So there are a lot of techniques out there to tackle these costs, and those are some of the things that the industry has very good best practices at this point to decrease and manage those costs. So things we have done at LegalZoom, smaller models or the right model for the job. Some models are very good at summarizing, extracting. That's all you need. You don't need to use a more expensive model. Prompt efficiency, the prompts have the tokens. The tokens are the unit of pricing. The more efficient your prompt, the cheaper it will be. Model routing, within even the same family, you can use one more advanced version of Claude versus another one, and that can be more expensive or cheaper. So routing your task at runtime to the right model can help you decrease that cost. And also optimizing the whole infrastructure, not much different than what you would do in any sort of API. That also has helped us reduce this cost. But as I said, I'm a big believer that the industry, in a way, either the models industry or the tools industry, will kind of take care of that for us that are consuming and building these applications. So while we think about that, I don't think that's the only thing that we actually have to think about. In fact, the second cost that I want to talk about is the cost of knowledge. And to explain that cost, just have to go back to a little bit of how these LLM applications work. And LLM applications, they are not simply an API call. At face value, you could have the user asking a question, and then you have a prompt that you pass to a foundational model, you pay the cost of your tokens, you get that response. And that could be enough. However, if you are, say, building a customer-facing application, and your customer is getting exactly the same response that they are getting out of ChatGPT, it begs the question of why they would be using your product versus ChatGPT. Also, you may want to use the LLM technology with content that only you know. In my example of LegalZoom's Article Center, OpenAI doesn't have our Article Center, so we actually need to get that Article Center accessible to this application, and that is more complex than just a simple API call. I'll tap into accuracy and hallucinations in a bit more, but you all have heard that LLMs, they hallucinate, and sometimes they have the wrong answers. So hitting the foundational model might not necessarily be enough or the best idea for your application. Instead, what we found to be most successful for differentiation and actually building powerful applications is layering your own IP, your own knowledge into these models. Technically, this can be done in several ways. The two more popular in the industry are RAG, short for Retrieved Augmented Generation, that is injecting your knowledge at runtime into that model, or fine-tuning. In some cases, tuning the weights of the model can be to your advantage, can provide better latency, you have more control. It's also a lot more expensive than RAG. But the point, regardless of the technical solution that you choose, you are actually layering your knowledge into that LLM application and making it unique to your business, making it different than what first people are going to get in the ChatGPT client. Now, let's be a little bit more specific and land this thinking a little bit about LegalZoom. As I said, we have been in the market for over 20 years, and we have seen a lot, and we do have a lot of knowledge. So we have done extensive research on rules and regulations for business formations, business licenses, and compliance filings. Those things are things that are done at a county level in the United States. That is not easy to find. Sometimes it's even hard to find what is the governing body of that particular license that you were trying to get. So we have done that extensive research. We have filed over 40,000 trademarks in the United States. We have formed over 4.6 million businesses. We have daily interactions with customers and experts and anonymized data that help us understand trends in the industry. And as I said, we have this over 1,000 attorney network, and we have delivered expert consultations that, again, have anonymized data that we can leverage as part of our knowledge. So when we build those applications that I showed, we layer all of this in, and not only what comes out of a foundational model. And what that is are applications that are more accurate, that are faster, and that is something that is scalable when you can actually expand as you have more knowledge. And now this, I said I was gonna talk about cost, and there is a cost to knowledge. It is not free. First of all, it doesn't stay clean on its own. Going back to the LegalZoom example, rules and regulations change, and they will keep on changing forever, and you will have to keep doing some extension of research and checking, is this still up to date, is this duplicated? Second, well, sometimes you actually need real-time refresh and real-time knowledge of things. So one of the things that we have realized is that human in the loop, in many cases, is not something that is optional. And what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about human in the loop here, I'm talking about the fact that a lot of this knowledge requires expert review. When you go back to the legal space, rules and regulations and this type of research, this requires expert eyes to validate, is this still up to date? Is this still correct? That is also true for many other segments, such as the medical segment, for example. So when you think about knowledge and the cost of knowledge, you have to think about all of this. It's not only acquiring, it's not only storing, it's not even only vectorizing and putting it somewhere in the digital world. It's actually making sure it is accurate. And most likely, you will need some sort of human in the loop to do that. So that's the second thing that I'd like to think about. But the third part, which is perhaps the most critical one for me, is evaluation. We started talking a little bit about hallucinations and how that is one of the problems of LLMs. But before we go a little bit more into that, let's go back to what are LLMs at its heart and why evaluation is so important for that. So LLMs outputs are probabilistic. And what that means, and I broke this down into three things. Number one is that the same input can have different outputs. By nature, it is generating text. So every time you ask, and even if you ask the same question, it may generate slightly different text. Now you're gonna say, what if I give it a template? What if I say, I want you to return a JSON format, or I want this type of structure? It is not necessarily true that it's gonna hold the same type of output. And the structure and format sometimes can be unpredictable. And yes, they guess with a lot of confidence. One of my favorite anecdotes that we got at LegalZoom about hallucinations, when we started our explorations with LLMs, we got a bunch of foundational models, and we asked them to tell us what are the business licenses required for different jurisdictions and NAICS code in the United States. And it was a meaty sample. And then we validated that against the ground truth hot research we had done manually with humans a couple of months ago. 56% of that sample that the foundational models came up with was completely made up. In other words, they made up government bodies that sounded very convincing. They made up license names. They made up a bunch of requirements. I am not gonna say what was the foundational model that we used, because I also think it doesn't matter. This was over a year ago. Pretty sure if I do this again tomorrow, it's gonna be much better. But I can be sure as well that the hallucination is not gonna be 0%. As I said, LLMs guess with confidence. So if you're worried about these things, if you are worried about trust, fidelity, reliability, you have to think of evaluation costs. And what are evaluations? Evaluations are any sort of activities that you do before you deploy and after you deploy that guarantee that you are watching what these applications are doing. In the agentic world, this is even more important, because these agents are not only generating tests, they are actually more autonomous, and they're actually leveraging tools, and they're making decisions. So they need to be watched. And how do you watch them? I like to think of evaluation in two phases. I like to think of pre-deployment evaluation. Everything you do before your model goes into production. And at runtime evaluation, which is everything that you do as your model is running. One fascinating thing about LLMs, and there's a lot of research that's coming out around it, is that they improve at runtime depending on what you do. The outputs can get better depending on certain things you do as you are serving these models. There's a lab at the University of Stanford, it's called Scaling Labs, that's doing a lot of research on that, how to improve an LLM as it is running. But going back to our diagram there, when we talk about like pre-deployment, there's gonna be a cost here to get this system to life. Most likely you're gonna have to produce test cases. You can actually use another LLM to generate test cases, but you're gonna have to evaluate these test cases either against the ground truth that you had, in my example of business licenses, that's what we did, or most likely in many cases, you are going to have human reviewers, people actually seeing what this LLM's output and seeing if that makes sense. And guess what? In many spaces, these human reviewers will have to be specialized staff. In LegalZoom's case, those have to be lawyers, so that is not any human. When you deploy these models, there are a wide variety of techniques that you can use to actually continue to evaluate them, and they involve cost. I brought here a couple of flows that are common in the industry. One that is getting very popular is using this that we call the LLM as a judge. So as your LLM outputs something, you have another LLM whose job is to evaluate the output of your first LLM against some criteria of accuracy. You can check for fidelity against the ground truth. You can check for politeness, tone, things like that. But guess what? If you're building an LLM to watch your first LLM, all of these costs that I talked about, the knowledge, the token, they most likely apply to this guy too. In some cases, the fidelity may be so important that you will want to actually stop that LLM response from going to the customer, internal or externally, and have a human review that output. And if you need to do that, you have to assemble a human-in-the-loop operation. You have to create a group of people that will be on call to watch the outputs of these models and make sure that this is good enough. And this may be super important in certain industries. So again, if you're talking about assembling an operation of humans to watch these LLMs, which may be important, this is cost again. Now, which of those costs I have to incur? It depends. It depends on the type of application. It depends on how much fidelity is important to you. It depends on the risk. And in some cases, you will need the host bank. In some cases, a simple cultural foundational model may do. But those are just some things that you have to think about. So here's what I would like you to take away from this. I believe token costs will likely continue to decrease in the industry. I don't think that necessarily means this application costs will flat out decrease, but I think it means that this will take care of itself. As I said, these companies have all interest that we adopt this technology and they will make it easier for us. So I think while we have to watch and pay attention to these things, I don't think it's the only thing we have to think about. Because I think the most interesting LLM applications, they will combine those foundational models, but they will also combine your own IP and your knowledge bases. And those will be a cost on itself, and that cost only you and your company can think about. And the third piece is if trust is important to you, and I guess it's important to all types of these applications, evaluating this model outputs, either pre-deployment and after deployment, is also a cost in itself. I would like to finish by saying that, look, this is a very fast-paced, evolving industry. Things are changing daily. And from the time that I wrote this talk to now, I can think of an extra 2 costs that I should have mentioned here with what is coming up. But it's been a pleasure. I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much.